Good day everyone, so I've seen my fair share of idiotic takes on the internet when it comes to Genshin Impact, and none more so than this idea that Bennet, Xingqiu and Xiangling are just so F2P amazing that they put all 5 stars to shame, and it's such an unfortunate situation that people aren't honest about these characters, and that's really what I want to investigate and talk about in today's video, to really give you a better sense of what it means to use these characters and why they're really not as great as some people make them out to be. Now what I'm going to do is compare the little trio here against Uemia, and I'm going to compare the three of them against a C5 Uemia. Now obviously you've already gotten the wrong idea, so let me explain. I'm not interested in getting Uemia. On my way to getting a C5 Uemia, I actually wanted a C6 Kirara, for those of you that have seen my videos on her, as well as a C6 Chevreuse. So getting a C5 Uemia enabled me to get two C6 4 stars. In other words, to get a specific C6 4-star character implies that you're going to get at least one or two limited 5-star characters, and I'll put up the probability chart in just a bit so that you know exactly what goes into it. But I just need to preface this by saying that even if you buy characters like Bennet and Xiangling from the shop, especially for new players, it still takes 34-star glitters and a period of 6 months before you can buy one after the other, to the point that in that 6-month period you would have already gotten the character. Or even if you assume that every 10 wishes you get 4-star glitter as a new player, it's still going to take you about 80 wishes just to buy one constellation of your beloved Xiangling. In other words, this idea that C6 4-star character is always just better than a C0 5-star is really ridiculous when you start looking at the probabilities. It takes 252 pulls on average to get a specific 4-star character, whereas for a specific permanent event 5-star character it takes 94. Now obviously variance is one thing that plays a bit of a big role in all of this, but on average that is genuinely how the odds work. In other words, if you really want to compare a C6 4-star character against a limited 5-star character, then you need to do so in a way that is fair. If a character has been in the game for a couple of years, then obviously that is going to have certain biases. You would have already been able to farm good artifacts for that character, you would have been able to level up all of their talents. In contrast, someone like Farina, that's been barely out for like a few months and so on, might not even have been fully farmed for. A lot of players might not even have all of her talents ready, they might not even have the weapons or the artifacts ready because of the new domain, and that is just the reality of it. When you really compare these two characters, you should not just make these silly comparisons like you saw there with the Zajev quote. You need to be realistic about what you're getting. In the case of someone like Farina, I suddenly have that a lot of my units can now be enabled with the Marichuse's Hunter set. I've got that a couple of healers are now suddenly very relevant. You've got Kokomi Hyper Carry being really as strong as it can ever be, etc, etc. It's the same when someone like Nahida came out. It's not just Dendra, but what she herself enables in terms of the teams like the Hyper Bloom or the Nilo Blooms and some of the other teams. That's just really the value you get from the character. So when we only look at pure outcomes, and these outcomes are only tied to clearing as fast as possible in the Spiral Abyss floor 12, which can favor some units at some times versus other units, then really we've got to be careful about making these stupid statements that one character is just simply better than the other character, because it's just not always the truth. And even the reasons behind the so-called truth that Xingqiu is so amazing might not always even be that sensible. I mean, look, here is Kokomi on field in the background, and she's going to get hit. Oh, but she didn't get interrupted. Well, why is that? Well, I didn't need Xingqiu to provide damage reduction or interruption to resistance, precisely because I understand that the poise bar for Kokomi went up from 50 to 200. If you don't know what that is, just look it up in terms of the TC. But basically, I knew that the attack that's going to land is not going to knock her off her feet. In other words, the so-called benefit that Xingqiu would have provided over Yelan in that case is just non-existent. The supposed damage reduction and interruption to resistance was completely unnecessary. In fact, it would even have hindered my Farina if she were at C0 in order to generate more fanfare stacks, because the damage reduction reduces HP fluctuations in a manner which means that my DPS output is going to be less relevant. So whilst there are benefits to using someone like Xingqiu, it's not always that you need these things. It's the same with Xiangling. I don't always need constant pyro application. This is what we've seen with Toma, and the fact that he's got a slower pyro application when it comes to the Burgeon teams, and even in other cases, like for instance very infamously in the Sugokumon team, where if you don't play around Xiangling's pyro application like well enough, or you don't time it well enough, then it can be really detrimental to your DPS. If you just remove Xiangling and replaced it with a Dendro unit in Sukokumon, for instance, then suddenly the team is far more consistent, it's far easier to play, but people don't want to tell you about that. They just want to tell you, oh, here is a big Hydro boss in the Abyss, and Xiangling can do double DPS because she has no ICD on her Elemental Burst, which hits every 37 frames and it's going to do double damage against a big target. It's like, yeah, we get the Xiangling playbook, but the thing is, so what? I mean, to get Xiangling to be truly effective, you need to put a lot of investment in getting good artifacts, especially loads of energy recharge, because by god, her and Bennet can just be such a pain to play sometimes. And when it comes to using these characters, especially for casuals that are running into Inazuma for the first time, they're going to struggle to use Xiangling effectively. For us that are veterans that are playing the game, we might just find that there are more consistent and other options available. It doesn't diminish the fact that you can get very good success with these characters. It doesn't diminish the fact that these characters have been used in so-called Bilibili speedruns and all these things. But what it does highlight is that we need to be honest when assessing these characters' strengths. It irritates me to no end when people say, oh, Bennet, Xingqiu and Xiangling are zero cost when it comes to speedrunning, when there is a clear mathematical and statistical argument to say that, yeah, you're going to put in quite a lot of effort into raising them to the point that having a couple or just one or two 5-star constellations might even just be a lot easier to obtain. That is still my position. I think a lot of people are allergic to this idea of 5-star constellations, but we really need to be honest in terms of the true cost of getting these characters to be really, really effective. And I mention this because when new players especially look at Genshin tier lists and they listen to what all the players say, the perspective very often is from a pure endgame outcome where someone has put in thousands of hours into their teams and so on, and yet when it comes to these new players, the more effective options that we've seen that Hoyo has enabled with Hyper Bloom and some of the other teams that have a higher damage floor are really the options we should be promoting, because they're just that much easier for people to obtain whilst they grind out their other characters. In other words, by setting people on the path of Bennet, Xingqiu and Xiangling, you've implicitly put people on a path in which they need to grind out and they need to use these characters, and because they are going to be impressionable, they'll use these characters in the overworld to a lot less effective degrees than they would in the Spiral Abyss. You see, in the Spiral Abyss you've got a big enemy, a big circle you can stand in, and it works. In the overworld, unfortunately, Xiangling Spironado ain't going to hit the enemy that's up there on a pillar. It's not always going to work out when you're in Inazuma and you don't have enough energy recharge with your Xiangling's 80 cost Elemental Burst, because you haven't unlocked the 5-star energy recharge artifact, and you don't have all these many mobs as you had in Mondstadt that could just funnel energy to you. A lot of the practical stuff when it comes to using these characters is always swept under the rug, but it's always touted from the beginning that this is the way in which you should carve out your Genshin so-called career path, the path of Bennet, Xingqiu and Xiangling, and I don't think that's really the best way of doing it. Regardless, from my perspective, no matter what people like suggest or other people say, we can run laps around Bennet, Xingqiu and Xiangling with appropriate investment and teams and so on, and it doesn't even take you to be a whale or a dolphin. It just depends on how you wish to vertically invest, but certainly once you get past the C2 stage with your 5-star characters, the trio really scene they're just boring. In my opinion, I just find them to be unfun to play, and even on my C0 account I just have far more consistent options, which is what I like and enjoy. In any case, feel free to disagree or agree with this video, and if you do disagree, please be more factual than just be like, oh, you've got a bad take, because when people say that, it just tells me that you're unwilling to engage in reasoning. Let's open up GC Sim, let's put down some Abyss gameplay, and let's analyze stuff, because that is really when we can uncover the truth, and hopefully once you do that, you'll start to see the viewpoint that I've got on this. Any case, this video has been going on for far too long. Thank you so much for watching. Cheers.